welcome back to the Solitary Practice Podcast. I hope everybody had a good week. I have argued with myself rather extensively for a week about this particular episode, whether or not I would post it, how I would record it, if I would record it. There's been quite a bit of back and forth. I do argue with myself a lot as I turn these things over and try to decide what I'm going to talk about each week. I really feel like I probably should talk about this. I also just really don't want to, if we're being honest. There are some experiences in my practice that are, I guess, intensely personal. They're mine. I don't really want to share them. I think very highly of them. They were very impactful for me. And yeah, they're mine. I don't really think that the entire world needs to know every little thing. However, I also see the logic of the fact that there are probably people out there with similar experiences who might, I don't know if they would benefit for it, but they might enjoy hearing somebody else's. So I suppose I'm going to try to tackle this. And one of the other things I find I do is I try to, I guess, editorialize this. So I only give just the bare minimum of information, and that usually unravels about 10 minutes later when I'm talking about something I skipped to begin with. So we're going to back this up. We'll probably take it from the beginning. And when I was much younger, I had, as we know, decided that I would basically commit my life to protecting this particular piece of property. I am essentially its custodian. I use magic to get it done. And then I got into my teens. I had a better understanding of what I was doing and what I was committing to. And, when you're hit your teenagers, you're a little more capable of abstract thought than you are at 3 or 4. And so I had basically, I guess what most people call reaffirmed that I absolutely still intended to do that. I was committed to that particular path. I had been working at it for many, many years. There's really little to no chance that I would have deviated from it because basically my entire life was built around it, so it wouldn't occur to me not to do it. But I had essentially gone through a reaffirmation that I was definitely going to go forward with it. And in hindsight, I realized that confirmation had set in process a chain of events that were so very small and minute that you basically would never pick up on them. I know I certainly did not, and I can't see how anybody in my situation would have. But that chain of events culminated, much like a butterfly effect or what I like to call the ripple effect, in a massive injury in the following spring. It was a little later in the spring than it is right now, but it was significant. The mundane, regular people were extremely traumatized by it. I was and I wasn't. At that point, I had managed to learn a certain amount of compartmentalization, and so I was able to kind of just separate the completely freaked out section of my consciousness and do what needed to be done with the other one. It wasn't the worst thing ever, but long story short, I eventually got out of the hospital, came home, spent the summer recuperating. The mundanes were incredibly traumatized by it. They used to like to wrap me in wool, and it was about 100 times worse after that, and I kind of had to put my foot down and would not be separated from the barns and my animals and doing basically what I had been doing for my entire life at that point. It fostered a period of growth for me. It basically, that reaffirmation had kind of set in play a series of events which forced me to grow as a practitioner. I had to learn to do a number of things, essentially handicapped. Part of that was the arrival of a particular horse that also had a really questionable set of circumstances that put her in my line of sight, I guess. And I ended up acquiring her and bringing her home. And let's not for a second think that this was some sweet and wondrous event. We did not get along. For the first, I would say probably year and a half, 2 years, we were not aligned at all. And it took some adjustment on both of her parts. I had to learn how to compromise. She had to learn some things too. And essentially, we had to learn how to work together, which in itself was a really good lesson for me because usually, even at that age, most things were pretty obedient to me anyway. She was not. I will always say that I am extremely fond of a horse that is independent and a thinker. And this one definitely was. She was much smarter than most of the people, and we spent the next 30 years together. She was profoundly influential in my magical practice. She was also my greatest friend and confidant. Quite frankly, she was my only friend and confidant because it's not like I could talk to anybody else here. It did me a lot of good to have someone that I could go and discuss what I was working on with that was not the local entities. It was an earthbound mortal creature, so, different perspective. Also, their language is not English, and so there was no danger of anybody around here overhearing our conversation. I think the relationship eventually developed into something that was probably a little bit tied too tightly. And it became, I guess, normal. It became very normal for the two of us not to be apart for any length of time whatsoever. At night, like most people, I suppose, put their horses in fences or barns or things, and that was not done with her. She usually was outside of my bedroom window, and that persisted, I don't know, until she died, essentially. She and I were always right together. Jokes were made because it was perfectly normal to find her tailing me around with whatever I was doing. It was also normal for her to steal people's food. We were together pretty much all the time. We had a number of wonderful adventures. I won't recap them all here, but safe to say that her thought pattern definitely influenced my practice. So I tend to be impulsive, hot-headed. I'm a lot chaotic. And I had spent many, many years, well, learning to be disciplined. You have to be a certain amount of discipline if you're going to go far. And that was impressed upon me in a long series of trainings. And to this day, like, I look very cool, very calm, very collected on the outside. I'm extremely disciplined. And I have learned to do that over the years. I have maintained it for a very, very long time. That, I don't know, impression has nothing to do with how I actually am. Family, acquaintances, people, probably you guys listening, think that I am, I guess, restrained, thoughtful, logical. I'm not. I don't know what else to tell you. I am not. I'm probably the furthest from that you can possibly get. And if anybody is horse oriented, you understand that there is a saying that says, "Show me your horse and I will tell you who you are." And she was the very embodiment of how I actually am. She was also considered to be basically a hellion chaos incarnate. She was an absolute nightmare. If somebody else tried to ride her, my sister used to try to sneak out to ride her, and her response was to wait until she was saddled and then lie down. Like, she was smart, she was opinionated, and she did whatever she wanted to do when she wanted to do it. For the most part, she knew when to toe the line, and she knew when not to. But probably the most important thing that she did was remind me of who I actually am and what I actually am. It was very easy to slip in my practice into a very formulaic, repetitive, I'm going to say a rut, basically. This time of the year we do this, and that time of the year we do that, and then there's this season and that season, and there's always the list of magical projects, and we're going right from one into the next, and we're always preparing. And I was good, don't get me wrong. I was doing a great job at that whole list, but there was very little inventiveness. It became very serious. It became very work oriented. And while it was still enjoyable and to some extent fun, it was all about getting the job done, and it was not a whole lot about living. I have no idea if that makes sense or not. It makes perfect sense to me because I was there and lived it. But anyway, her entry onto the scene kind of restored that live, experiment, have a good time, fool around, do absolutely crazy stuff, you're only young once kind of vibe back into my practice. And we very much did do some absolutely crazy stuff. And she was with me through it all. Now, obviously, time changes, things move on, and eventually, she was extremely old, even for a horse. And then I made the call one day that it was time to put her down, so we did do that. After that lovely transition, and we buried her and those kind of things, I waited a little bit. It takes a while when anything passes away before it starts to really fully transition over into the afterlife. Now, some go quicker, some go slower. She was, I would say, probably on average, and made the full transition once I'd seen her move across. I hadn't really seen her again for quite some time. And then there was an incident a few years back when I ran across her. I was out doing a completely different job, and I ran across her in her next, we're going to call it incarnation. I don't know what, I think that probably sums it up best. So I ran across her in her next incarnation, and it is not that she looks or is anything like what she was when I knew her. But again, everything has that very core energy signature that if you know what you're looking for and you can get way down into it, you can pick up on it. And I think I would probably recognize hers under any circumstance. I think I could probably pick up on hers. And I was surprised to come across her. Now, obviously, she doesn't know me, and I did not go getting in close and whatnot. But I did stay back for a little bit, half hour or so probably, and just observe. Not because she was doing anything interesting or because I intended to do anything, but it was, I guess, very nice to sit. I mean, I'm going to say in her presence, but I was very much not in her presence. Again, I stayed back and removed from it. But just to see that core energy, the signature that is hers, again in an unplanned moment, like just to come across it randomly like that, it was quite lovely to sit and observe that. And just know that, she's moved on. She's doing what she is doing, and she's out there somewhere, not as I knew her at all, but, that energy lives on, and she has moved on. I have noticed, though, that since I've lost her, my practice has become what it was before she was here. So it is extremely aligned with what is the work. We move from one job to the next job. There's very little innovative, adventurous stuff going on. Once in a while, I have a moment. It doesn't usually last very long, but I have been very much on my own since losing her. Again, I am without, I guess, my confidant, my person, and I say person, but please use that very loosely. She was never a person, but I have no one in which I kind of chat with daily about all the little things. Also, it's not like anybody else knows the local energies around here, so it's not like I can be like, this one was a pain, and can you believe that what's going on with that one, and just, I guess, the magical gossip of the area. I don't have anybody to do that with anymore either. So I basically just now kind of, I do what I need to do. Everything's a job. I'm getting it done. But I'm very much not, I guess is Venusian? I don't know if maybe Venusian is the right word here, as I once was. It's not to say I never do anything kind of fun or inventive, but it's on a much smaller and much more, I guess, regimented scale. I don't do anything without considering all the ripple effects, and basically I don't just do anything because forget it. I feel like doing it, we're going to go. And I kind of miss having her around, but also, well, I guess I'm just older now and I have too many duties and responsibilities to see to really worry about that. So in the time, she was appropriate for what I was doing. And now, she's transitioned out, I've transitioned, and things change. So, couple things out of this story. Number one, your practice is going to change. You're always going to remember the lessons you learned previously. You may not use them anymore. It doesn't mean they're gone. It doesn't mean you forgot them. You might get a little rusty, but they're all still there. They influence how you look at things and how you do things as you go forward. Sometimes they influence how you think about those things. But your practice will not stay the same. Anything that is so very rigid that it does not allow for change, growth, alternate direction, accommodation to the circumstances, you're going to be confined by it. It's going to be constrictive, and eventually it's not going to work. I've seen a lot of people give up or quit or try something new, and they hop from path to path to path to path. Ultimately, every path is your own, and your path is going to change. Your practice is going to change. You are going to change. It just happens. I don't know. I guess if I'm going to give advice about that, don't be alarmed about it. Kind of go with it a little bit. You can struggle against it if you want, but in the end, you're going to go where you're going to go, or else you're not going anywhere. Your choice entirely. So usually I don't particularly care for change, but I don't usually argue with it a whole lot either, because it's kind of pointless. I know from experience that things are just going to change, and what I'm doing now won't be the same as what I'm doing 6 months from now. Who knows? Maybe this summer I'll throw caution to the wind and do something absolutely insane by my standards. It's unlikely. There's too much going on this year. Maybe next year. We'll see. And I might say maybe next year forever and nothing may change. I may get more formalized and restrictive and contained and centralized in this practice. Who knows? I don't know what's coming. I'm not particularly concerned. I'm just going to try to expand my skill set and refine it as I go and be ready for whatever crops up. So there's that. And then the other thing is, I see a lot of people are very fond of the concept of familiars. If you're on Reddit anywhere, usually Fridays, they have, on some of the subreddits, they have Familiar Friday, usually the day I am not in any of the Reddits. I find a lot of people have, cats, dogs, tarantulas, I don't know, I've seen a lot of things be considered familiars. Looking at my, I guess, own experience with the mare, I can honestly say that I did not then, nor do I now, consider her my familiar. Was she a huge part of my practice? Did she influence my practice? Did she do some things of her own? Yeah, absolutely. Still not my familiar. I honestly wouldn't have wanted to subject her to that anyway. If you spend time looking at what a familiar really is and what a familiar really does, if we're talking like physical, plain, mortal animal kind of familiar, I can't see an instance in which I would A, have use for one, or B, want one. I would not want that. And I certainly don't think that she was. I personally find that many people claim that their animal is their familiar. And what the animal really is their beloved companion. It is their friend. They're very attached to it. And essentially, this is going to sound terrible. So sorry. But they need something that loves them unconditionally. And because a pet often will, they think it's their familiar. That's not what a familiar is. I don't begrudge them that, and quite frankly, if anybody wants to call their anything, and I don't care what it is, I don't care if you get a crow or a skunk or, I don't know, something, and call it your familiar, it's fine. It doesn't matter to me either way. But for me, I know what a familiar is supposed to be, and I can honestly say I've never had one. I don't particularly want one. What I have had that might be considered a familiar is a familiar spirit, and I've had several of those. I still have a few kicking around. Those are an entirely different can of worms. So I've got a few of those. I rather like having those, and I would strongly advocate that if you're going to get some kind of familiar, get a familiar spirit. Do not get a familiar animal. That's my personal preference. Obviously, you can do whatever you want to do, but I prefer familiar spirits. First of all, they're not going to die on you. A living, breathing creature, if you're going to put that much investment into having a familiar, again, the more common, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to pick on these because they tend to be the more common: cats, dogs, birds, I don't know, spiders, even, snakes and things. A lot of them do not have the life expectancy for the amount of, I guess, work that you're going to need with them. So I prefer familiar spirits because they're not, generally speaking, in danger of dying and popping out of existence here. They're going to be around for a while. So they're going to have a better ability to do what you need them to do. They also tend to have quite a bit more, I'm going to say, experience. Yeah, I just find them to be much more sensitive, able to pick up on things that living creatures sometimes struggle with. If your practice grows, you need something that's going to grow with you. I prefer something that's like 3 or 4 steps ahead of me or has rampantly different perspectives, because again, I'm not looking for something that's going to tell me yes and agree with me all the time. I prefer things that kind of argue with me and push me in different directions and try to test me on occasion. Keeps me on my toes, and it also teaches me things, for lack of a better term. I learn a lot of things from all of my local familiar spirits. I don't know. I don't mind getting a little more attached to them because I know they're going to be around for a while. If you get really, really super attached to your cat and then 7 years later your cat dies, you're now heartbroken because your cat's dead, and then all the work that you did with your cat is pretty much a moot point. The cat isn't here to absorb attack or do anything else. The other thing is, again, familiars often absorb magical attack, or at least that's the lore with it. Would I want to do that to something I actually kind of liked? Because generally speaking, most people seem to like their familiars. I really wouldn't want them getting fried with some extra magical energy. That seems kind of, I don't know, it always struck me as kind of cruel. It's like you're setting that poor thing up to fail, and why would I want something I liked fried? I guess fried is probably a cold term, but is, for lack of a better term, they are soaking up that terrible energy, and it's being taken into them, and unless you've got some kind of really good filtration system on that, they may or may not be able to handle it. And I have never heard of anybody setting up a basically a filtration system of some form on their familiar to protect it. Usually they're banking on the familiar to protect them. I don't know, that just the whole thing seems kind of self-centered. Like if you really love your familiar that much and you're that attached to it, why on earth would you let it get hit with something that's meant for you and basically take that hit without setting it up for some protection? And I guess I could say that it isn't really necessary for you to love your familiar, but it does seem like most people who claim they have familiars are extremely emotionally attached to theirs. But anyway, so I'm ranting along on about familiars a little bit here, and I think probably because periodically I stop and wonder, like, was she really a familiar? Or am I just, like, so against the idea of a physical familiar that I've just been basically in denial for, I don't know, 35, 40 years. Ultimately, I always come to the same decision. She was not a familiar. At best, she was a long-term companion that assisted with growth. Never had to, again, assume any direct hits or attacks of any form or negative energy of any form. That was not something that she needed to do. I doubt that's something that she would have done. She probably would have stepped sideways and been like, you deal with it. Not her circus, not her monkeys kind of thing. So anyway, it's probably mid-swing into spring right now. Snow is off. Frogs started peeping the other day. 3 good hard frosts, and we should be over the hump and well and truly into spring. It'll be a while before summer gets here when we get there. But it is nice these days to kind of, well, for lack of a better word, I'm tromping through the woods visiting cemeteries when I can. It's been kind of busy lately, so I haven't had a lot of time. But I do like to go up onto the hill and sit where we buried her. There are a number of horses buried up there. That's kind of like the horse burial spot, I suppose. We have other spots, dogs in one area, cows. There's a section for the cows too. One of the glories of having a place this big is we actually have sections where certain things get buried. And so I like to go up where the horses are buried and sit up there and kind of look. It's on a hill, it's on a rise. The view is fantastic. Kind of wish you could see it, but also you don't really need to see it. It's just lovely. And so I will camp out up there with all the graves, and then if the weather is good, sometimes I will troop through the woods. There are a number of cemeteries from old homesteads hidden in the forest here and I will, this time of year, go visit a lot of them. There are not too many people alive anymore who actually know where they are, and probably once I die, I would say most, if not all of them, will no longer be, like, people just won't know where they are. They'll no longer be marked. There'll be no way to find them. So anyway, on that happy note, I think I'll stop here for today. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with others. If you have any questions or a topic you'd like to hear more about, you can always, contact me through my website, thesolitarypractice.com. Options there, you can leave me a voicemail, you can email me, whatever works for you. As always, I appreciate your feedback, and I do appreciate everybody listening each week. Thanks again, and I will see you next week.